Are you looking for world-class health and wellness advice combined with a dose of inspiration and spiritual encouragement? You've come to the right place. This is nourishment for body and soul. This is Manna, and I'm Dr. Turner. Welcome.
I know that sounds so cliche, and we all know about the hero's journey, and that story arc is in everything from Star Wars to, Odysseus, and you name it. It's out there. But those archetypal truths and archetypal patterns are things we do have to face. We do have to take on an understanding of what is my role in the world, and what will help me achieve that role. And so what I started engaging the workout was, where am I using this excuse? Like, where is this excuse coming up? Poor me, I don't have this, or I've got to get approval by being excellent in whatever way. And starting to go, okay, let's take the eyes off of me and let's start saying, and I love this phrase, it came to me a long time ago. How about if you were going to be strong enough for two? Okay, not just strong enough for you, but strong enough for two. And this idea came to me after 9/11. Again, another huge jolting experience for all of us. I volunteered for the Army, and I was 30. So
Wow.
not 18, looking for the GI Bill to pay for college or going ROTC. I was like, look, many of my relatives have been in the military at World War II and et cetera. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to make it my career, but I want to put my name on the list, that if I'm needed, I will answer the call. So I went into the Army National Guard. And I remember in basic training, at the time I had two young kids, two boys. And I remember at the time thinking, I'm putting myself in the control of someone else. When you enter the military, you are not the decision maker anymore. You're signed all that away. And that there's good parts of that and bad parts, right? But for me, one of the growth points was I got to spend, at least in basic training, I got to spend 10 weeks with 300, 200 some odd guys, and I got a huge dose of man training. Not the complete thing, for sure, right? And it's not a substitute for having a father. But I recognize that part of what was going on there was this idea of, Eric, you have thought of yourself as small and weak your whole life. And you're 6'4" and 190. You're not a little guy, but you sure think like a little guy, and you act like a little guy. And by that, I don't mean stature. I mean the idea of weakness. And I started to do a workout, literally, physically, in a way I'd never done. And it started to work out on the inside. Not comparatively. I mean, I was 30. There was guys there that were 17 and 18 and way stronger, way faster, way everything more. It wasn't comparative, but I started to see, that 12-minute mile became an 8-minute mile. That 8-minute mile became 2 miles in 13 minutes. And it was like, huh. And I was like, I did not know I could grow in strength. And that started to break that paradigm that I was believing, like the baby elephant in the story that's tied to the little post. But when it's an adult, they could snap that post in half, but it doesn't. That was me. I started to see, you know what? I can not only be strong enough for me, I can be strong enough for two. And that was the important thing. The important thing was to start to understand, you know what? I have a journey through strength. That's not about being macho, and it's not about competitive, blah, blah, blah. But it is about, you're not utilizing your tool. You've been given, a sports car, and you're thinking of it like a dump truck. And I don't mean that I've got some great physical prowess or I'm a great athlete. It's not that, but it is the idea of stewardship, of going, hey, get over this whole I'm a weak guy whole thing, and start taking responsibility for growing in the strength that you need to. And part of that was you have to stop thinking about it's all going to end tomorrow. You know, you don't eat right if you think it's all going to be over tomorrow. You don't sleep correctly. You don't do relationships correctly. You don't handle your money correctly. If you're always thinking it's going to be over tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Short-term thinking robs you of the longevity of that consistency that started producing some results. And that was what my workout started to be. And I think in some ways in the Army, it really started to take form because, you know, I mean, at least the Army back then, I don't know about today, but back then, you still got hit. You didn't just get sweared at, right? It wasn't just intense. It was like, yeah, this is full on. And again, I know that many things have changed and for the better in some cases, but it was definitely, there's no excuses that are going to exist here. That you can take your excuses and you know what you can do with them. and 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 this is that week, you know what is not going to fly here. And I was like, I don't have any play here. Like, I don't have a card to play. And it's like, right, you don't. That card is not going to take you where you got to go in your life. So you got to get rid of that play in your playbook. And you got
Mm-hmm.
to, frankly, just man up and
Yes.
own it.
Yes.
And that was a moment for me. You know, I so appreciate that while that's not the goal of the military, and in this case, the Army, for me, I used that challenge as the opportunity to fill in some gaps and to recognize you have got to father yourself. Okay, it sucks that you didn't have a dad and a bunch of other things that happened. That's terrible. I'm so sorry about that. And guess what? It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And you got to take responsibility for those gaps and you got to
Mm-hmm.
be honest that they're there. And now and this was where I started seeking it out. Now I went to Tom Brown Jr. and did the survival schools. Now I went to fast defense and got certified in combatives, and I went into the martial arts. Now it was like, I'm like, okay, who can teach me? You know, like I kind of went into the mode of like, somebody knows how to do this, and I got to go apprehend that knowledge. And it was wonderful. You know, I mean, it was a wonderful series of mentors and masters that, you know, they themselves aren't perfect humans. Of course, that's the wrong thing to look for. You don't need a guru. You don't need a, you know, that thing, a messiah, but you got to find people who do have a measure of mastery in some area. And that's where I stumbled into E-Myth. That was one of those moments because Michael Gerber was a master at systemization. I mean, he knew it soup to nuts and would let you know too. You know, he did not suffer fools lightly, but that became the burning desire is I have got to take responsibility for these gaps and for this weakness. And it can't just be strong enough to have a good story at the party so I don't, you know, look stupid. It like, no, no,
Mm-hmm.
no. You got to sound good on the mic, wake up in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of the night, get the microphone out. You sound great. not
Mm-hmm.
not with all the setup and the bells and whistles. And I'll tell you what, it was of course that's a terrifying, you know, harrowing process. But that refining, though, is where there's real self-esteem. And I started to care just a little bit less in a healthy way about what everybody thought. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I started to say, well, what do I think? You
Mm-hmm.
know, and I started to say, I'm not doing this, you know, for somebody else's approval. And I want to emphasize, started. It was not like Shazam, I'm over it. Not at all. And I think in many ways, I'm still working through it, you know. But that again, you know, like I said, it's the deciding this did happen to me. It's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. And if
Mm-hmm.
I can ask the question, did it happen for me? Now we're into a whole other game because now I can say, huh, if I choose to look at it a certain way, yes, it can happen for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that this is true, but I've got 6 boys. We could talk about that in a minute if you want to. And I very often feel that I'm fathering on behalf of my dad. Like I'm able to do what he was not able to do. He did not have any other children. So he didn't get a chance to be a dad. And as I've now been a dad for 26 years almost, I look at that as I'm getting to um and that's not set the record right, but I'm getting to honor what he
Mm,
would have done if he'd had the ability to do it.
mm,
You know what I mean? And I'm like, I'm hoping he's seeing it, right? And he's involved in that way at some level, you know, right? There's a connection there to say what you weren't able to do that was such a wound for
mm.
me. I've
Yeah.
taken that wound and worked out on it to try to be the kind of father that not only that I wish that I had, but that I feel like I'm called to be, you know, because it's now not a victim situation. It's now, I don't know, in the self-defense analogy, it's like the guy walks up to you to hit you with a hammer, and you know how to take the hammer away. He scurries off and gets out of there, and you start using that hammer to fix the wall. It's like, yeah, that thing you brought for destruction, because I'm trained, I can take that and use it for production. And that
Mm,
was really that mindset shift that you know, that started to happen at that point.
mm. Your story is resonating with me so much and striking some chords. You know, I like to think about this idea of the generations. You know, you mentioned how there was an epiphany in your point of life where you realize that there's like it's not just about you. There's maybe even a generational pattern that's going on in a larger arc of time, and God works with
Yep.
people and generations and things, right? And
Yep.
and then think about this. I mean, isn't this extraordinary, Eric? You didn't have a father. You didn't know what it meant to be a father. You struggled with that gap, what it would even be a man. And then it turns out that you have 6 kids, right? And guess what? They're all boys,
Yep.
all of them. You have 6 sons, right?
Yep.
Now, is that
Yep.
just a coincidence? You know, I mean, I think that's too coincidental. I'm sorry.
Right.
For a guy with father issues, as you just got done talking about, and now you have 6 sons,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and right. And not only do you get to have worked on yourself and be a better person then for these 6 sons who are being raised by an amazing father, an amazing male role model, who's, and I'm not just saying that to blow some smoke around. I know you very well. And also, yeah, and I mean, and I know, you know, a lot of guys out there, and I've seen good fathers and bad ones, et cetera, et cetera. They have creme de la creme fatherhood going on, from the homeschooling to the martial arts to the spiritual to the mental development you have them on. I mean, all this stuff. You brought all of the best of yourself that you took responsibility for kind of around that age of 30 and beyond. You're giving it to them. They're raised with like A+ fatherhood in one generation. You turn this all around, right? And from their viewpoint now, all the way percolating down, the story is I've had this amazing dad, and this is what he's like, and this is what I learned from him. This is how he spoke into me as a man, and all that, right? So it's it's starting off the arc of something extraordinary on into the future for them. It's redemption for you. It's a total turnaround, and for your dad in some way, it's like
Yeah.
right? It's like the realization of something still for him, because he's living on in you,
Yes.
obviously, and in a metaphysical
Yes.
way. He is, right? You're
Yep.
carrying him
Yep.
around
Yep.
50% and 100% on the
Yeah.
man side, on the
Yeah.
chromosomal bit. So
Right.
he's living on. It's like you're fulfilling something from beyond the grave that he never quite had a chance to do, but you're took responsibility. Now you're doing it. Now you have a chance to do it times 6. And that's
Yeah.
that's extraordinary for him. I have to think that if he's aware of that, it's like, what a
Yeah.
blessing, what a vindication, let's say.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that
Yeah.
to have that
Yeah.
opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
mean, I appreciate you saying that, and I wholeheartedly agree. And I also just want to say, you know, far, far, far from being a perfect father, but I would say a wholehearted. You know,
mm,
I certainly have made mistakes, and I wouldn't want to give anyone the impression, you know, I just got it all
mm,
figured out. It's certainly, I certainly never took it for granted, and I never was unconscious. You know, it's like I was
mm,
always like, how do I do this? And so, kind of like when you don't have a roadmap, you become like hyper
mm,
aware of the road
mm,
you're on, because you're like, I
mm,
have no idea where I'm going. So I feel like by hook or by crook, I did, like really try, you know what I mean? And I do really try to be the father I should be. But of course that's definitely not perfect. Not
Sure,
at all.
sure.
Yeah.
Your story reminds me of a very emotional moment from my own life too. Along this theme of living something out that our dads didn't get a chance to, and kind of like, embodying something and raising a flag of victory with them across a generation. That when you were talking about that, it reminded me, my father, who's African American, grew up in Boston. He was born in 1935. And so he grew up still with a pretty hostile environment, racially. And he described some of those problems growing up. And he talked about how, for example, his father was one of the first black men in Boston who was permitted to own a gun. And he was not in the police force, but he was, because he was a trusted courier in the stock market. And he would walk around sort of like with satchels of certificates of deposits and large amounts of money and transactions up and down the financial district in Boston. And he actually had to be armed to guard that stuff and make sure it went from point A to point B. So he rose pretty high in terms of, his work and career aspirations and ceiling for himself. My dad, tried to rise as well and do what he could, but was stymied in some ways and ended up joining the military and went off to California out west, kind of the land of opportunity, a little more freedom. GI Bill, went to UC Berkeley, got educated. And so things started to lift off for my dad. But Boston was still, I think, a little bit of a repressive place for him, and in a place where he felt like, he and his family had not been able to be their best selves, let's just say, traditionally. So when I got accepted to Harvard Medical School, I show up, I'm moving into my dorm at Harvard. I go, Dad, where were you born? He's like, well, it's this old hospital. It's not even around anymore. I mean, they closed it down. It was for poor people. It was sort of like the indigent hospital that they would, people would go to have birth. I'm like, well, what was the name? He's like, it was called Boston Lying In Hospital. And I'm like, Dad, you're not going to believe this. I'm sitting in my dorm right now, Dad. I'm looking at my window, and I'm looking at the marquee of this building across the street, which right now is some lab building with a bunch of cubicles and office space. But it's got this old marquee that's been there since forever, and it says Boston Lying In Hospital. I'm like, Dad,
Wow.
I'm in the dorm at Harvard Medical School looking at the hospital for indigent, poor black people that you were born in. And this is amazing. And now I'm taking this journey on behalf of the Turner family and the men in particular who never quite had a ceiling on what they could be and do. I'm here at Harvard. I'm going to make this happen. And my first night at Harvard Med School, I went over, there's these Gothic columns in this courtyard. It's like Greek cathedral looking center. And I went right up the steps of that, and I fell on my knees. This was at midnight when no one was around. I fell on my knees and I prayed. I'm like, God, I'm thanking you that I'm here. Give me the strength. Help me just do right and just to be excellent and see this through. This is going to be a challenge, but I feel like I'm here on behalf of my whole family. I mean, I'm looking at the building my dad was just born in, like, be with me, Lord. Let's do this. I had a successful career by the grace of God, a lot of hard work, people who supported me, etc. On my last night of Harvard Medical School, I went to the same building, got on my knees at midnight, thanked the Lord. I was like, we did this. Yes, brother. And then I graduate. My dad flies out from California for the graduation. He's now in his 70s. You got to understand, like, the look of just thrill and gratitude and fatherly pride and family pride and like resolution and joy. I mean, he was on cloud 10. We spent about 4 days together. We, ate food and went here and there. And he was walking with my child, his first grandkid, or one of his first grandkids, on his shoulders, and just enjoying life. And there I am when I walk across with my Harvard Medical School diploma. There's my wife, my young kid. I think she was like 1 or 2 at the time. And then my dad, like, just exploding with joy, like taking pictures, me pose with the diploma right in front of the building. Yeah. So that day, it's like God gave me that opportunity to snag a victory on behalf of my family across some generations, is what that felt.
Well, it reminds me of the quote, Michael, and I'm sorry, I don't know who said it, but somebody out there will know. He who looks for providences will have providences to find. You were looking at that building and you had an open spirit to providence and you found it, right? I mean, that's, I know people can say, look, it's begging the question, but the reality is that all of us are begging the question, whether you're an atheist or you're a scientist or you're this or you're that, whatever your worldview is, you are assuming things in your worldview that you cannot prove and that are unprovable. You can't prove logic using logic, right? You can't create language without having language. There's a foundation from which we are all operating on that guides us into what we do and don't see. People don't see the things they're not told to look for. And if you're looking for that through line, if you're looking for that meaning, yes, can we make up stuff? Yes, we can. We sure can. But the reality is that when you look for those things, they're there. And again, not to sound like woo woo or off the rocker here, but the reality is that we are all living in a story that we're telling ourselves moment to moment. And the question is, what story are you telling? I was telling a victim story, and that was having tragic consequences in my life. I don't know how long it took my dad to die, but I've talked to the other firemen who were there that survived. We went to the 40th anniversary memorial service a while back. And I talked to several of them, and they all said, hey, I just want you to know, probably no one ever told you, he died instantly. He didn't burn to death. The building collapsed on him. So there was no like agony and all the stuff. It was over in an instant. And I said, okay, in my heart, it took a millisecond for it to happen, but I've been replaying it 1 billion times. And it was time to stop playing the movie. Now, you can say, well, that's truth, or it's not truth, or it's subjective, but it's truth to me. It lived for real in my mind, and for real when I told a different story of, yes, that's horrible, and yes, that's terrible, but yes, it's done. It is over. That story, which doesn't live in objective reality in a certain sense, but from a subjective experiential reality, that is a truth. Right. And that truth, the different story, that reframing is what changes us. And if we look for a way that the story can be an empowering story, a story that gives us hope, a story that does take us to the next step, and that isn't just, going in a downward spiral, then, yeah, I don't think that there's anything out there that cannot be transformed. I love this quote by Richard Rohr. If we don't transform our pain, we will transmit our pain. That's reframing. That is reframing. That is, I am looking for a different story container for that set of facts. The same set of facts, but in a different story container, has a wildly different outcome. And that's what I think, it's so great what you're doing, how you have spoken about your expertise in the medical world as an entrepreneur, as a father, as a husband, as a business owner. Like, that's what I see is so powerful about who you are, is you're able to create such an important container that leads to health and life and again, overcoming, just as this even a theme for your podcast is such a brilliant idea. And it's so much what we all need to hear.
Wow. Thank you for mentioning it, Eric. That's encouraging. I feel like we can end right there, other than I've got one burning thought and question on my mind.
Sure,
one last little riff, like, musical coda. We'll just bring this on nicely.
Sure. Oh yeah.
I don't want to die with
down
this song
coda.
inside me. Okay.
Yeah, man. Yeah, he knows it. Yeah,
this is
let's
lovely,
do it.
brother.
Let's do it.
Yeah, well, I want to go back to that moment when you're in the Army, you're in the drill sergeant, phase and basic training, and you realize you can't play that card anymore. Like being a victim and being soft and all that, and like saying, "Time out, I hurt," or "This is unfair." Or, "Hey, I never had a dad who ran and made me do push-ups before, so this is new to me." Like all that, what got thrown out the window and put it wherever and all that. Like, I want to return to that moment and just comment on that a little bit in terms of like my own insight, my little story from my life, and maybe we can kind of end it there. But I will phrase it in the negative, right? And which is the insidious, destructive, sapping, debilitating nature of an excuse.
Oh,
right?
Come on.
Of an excuse. If we agree to hold on to an excuse, it does everything that I just said, and it just takes vitality and it takes agency, and it creates victimhood, it creates resentment, it creates anger, it creates feeling justified, and it creates a limit on where we want to go and where we think we can go, right? And it creates envy. Like, it's just so poisonous if we just accept an excuse and just agree to just take it into our lives and just sit with it, right? An excuse, right? And I remember how I had to learn this. I'll keep it very brief, but it was actually studying for med school. There was a class that I went to over the summer studying for the med school entrance exam. This was at Yale University. It was like a 12-week intensive. And right away in the first day or two of the class, the guy who taught it was a maverick. He was off the charts. Very intense guy. I like him, but he was like off the charts, kind of different type of guy. He was from Cuba. Like, he fled here on a boat. He taught himself English. He worked his way through college. He went to med school. He became a super, famous doctor. Guy was like a genius. He also, I think, did martial arts. He was real intense. But anyway, he's like, okay, here's what we're going to do tonight. He's like, I'm going to start lecturing. I'm going to talk to you about physics, chemistry, all the stuff in the MCAT exam. And by the way, we're going to stay up all night doing it. None of you is going to fall asleep. You're going to pay attention. You're going to take notes. I'm going to be quizzing you as we go along. I'm going to quiz you in the morning when we're done. And we're going to lecture all night. And here we go. And like, he started at 8 p.m. and I was like, this guy's crazy. Right. And I'm like, I'm getting tired. And it's like my friend's elbowing me. And he's like calling on people and calling you out and like embarrassing you and telling you like, wake up, do this. Come on, let's go. Like, and because he had to prove a point to us that we were capable of that we were capable of pushing beyond these perceived limitations and barriers to actually stay up all night and keep our minds sharp and still retain information and still function. And we had to get rid of every excuse about, I'm too tired and it's too late and I need more coffee and blah, blah. And like, this is too much complicated material. Like, every excuse had to be wrung out of us, right? And he was the only one, frankly, man enough and aggressive enough to do it academically that I had ever experienced at that point. I loved it. I felt like a reborn creature, the next day after that, right? But I was like, man, he pushed it. Like, he pushed it. And he did that a couple times during those weeks, but I loved it, man. It got rid of every excuse, right? And from that point on, like, academically, it was just like perform. Like Harvard, okay, I got a test on Monday. I know if I have to stay up all night and study on Sunday, I will, and I'll be ready for that test. Get to the Mayo Clinic, I got to work all day. Guess what? I need a side job because I got a stay-at-home wife and 5 kids. And I'm trying to save some money for a down payment on a house when I finish residency. So my side job is I work at these ERs in these small towns in Minnesota. So I work my regular job at Mayo, come home, kiss the wife, paint into some scrubs, jump in the minivan, drive like an hour through the middle of nowhere in Minnesota, sometimes through snow, hit the ER, work my shift in the ER all night, drive back in the minivan. But guess what? I don't go home because I don't have time for that. I go straight to the Mayo Clinic in my van in the parking lot of the Mayo Clinic, sometimes snowing. I change out of my scrubs into my nice business suit and tie because I got to look fresh, show up, work my job at the Mayo Clinic. They don't know where I was last night. They don't want to know. They don't care. They just know that Turner needs to show up today and be a good doc. So I'm ready to go work that shift. Then I get to come home and finally like sit down and have a meal and like say hello to the kids. And by the way, the 5 kids want your attention and the wife wants your attention at that point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I had gotten to that point where I was like, I can do this and I will do this. I will accept no excuses in the pursuit of what's necessary right now for my family. I will make this happen. With God's help, I will make this happen. Right. And we've got to get to that like mindset, Eric, that unlocks the kind of personal and professional growth and development and unlocked for you at age 30 when you finally got that. Right. And when we just like agreed to disagree with every excuse that we've been holding around and like set it down and take ownership of whatever problem is there and confront it and start to deal with it in a systematic way and start to push ourselves like Michael Jordan. I'm uncomfortable when I take my 100th jumper in a row. Well, tomorrow I won't be, and now I take 200 in a row, and now it's 300, and now I do wind sprints, and then I do my 300 jumpers. Like, you keep pushing because there's a drive for excellence and to be something, to represent something in the world, So that's my thought there on the excuses and just
man. That's just fire. That's fire, brother. That is fire. I love it. I love it.
Anyway, that was a passionate outburst. I'm not sure how coherent it was, but anyway,
no, it's I would say 10 out of 10, buddy. And here's why: because everybody has that voice, the whiner or whatever that's whispering in their ear. This is why you can't. Maybe it was accentuated by a life circumstance. Maybe it was accentuated by a parent or a brother or somebody who said that flippant comment, 10 or 20 years ago, and it still lives in you. What you're saying is so key because it literally is the word decide. decide, same suffix as homicide, suicide, pesticide, something's dying. And when we decide, we're eliminating the alternative. I could be this victim who's never got enough and always needs blah, 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 blah. But when I decide that I'm not, I'm eliminating that. I'm violently eliminating that from my reality. And I will not use that script anymore. It does not serve me. I think the fierceness with which you just shared what you're sharing, that's what we have got to kindle, recapture, honor, and esteem once again. With all the whole thing of everybody be so nice and nobody offend anybody. Of course, there's a place for all that, but there's also a place for the fierceness of our commitment to our highest self, to our full potential. And I do not think you get there by playing nice, quote unquote, internally. You got to be honest, and you got to be brutally honest, and you got to get to your edge, and you got to be standing there at your edge and go, hey, I'm acquainted with feeling uncomfortable. I am not going to be acquainted with manufacturing another excuse. And that's you're calling me up right now. You're calling me up right now.
Yes, brother. I love it. Well, no more to be said. We're going to end on that inspiring word from you, Eric. This is phenomenal. Listening audience out there, friends, I trust you were inspired as I have been today. I've had goosebumps several times, and my heart leaping up and down as Eric has shared his story. And I just feel just kind of the Holy Spirit, whirling around in my soul here today through this conversation. Thank you, Eric, for making some time and speaking freely, sharing from the heart about your journey, brother, your father, and all of that. And, it's a beautiful story that's still being written in your life that you are choosing and deciding to write every day. And I honor that, brother. I salute that.
Oh, brother. Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's great to be with you. Take care.
This wraps up another edition of Manna. I enjoyed our time together, and I hope that this has inspired you towards a healthy and happy life. Be blessed.